Hello everybody, my name is Noah and I'm 17 years old. I was born in Belgium and so I'm just going to give you a little bit about my backstory. I was born in Belgium and so was my father. My mother was born in, can you scroll? My mother was born in Burundi, which is the flag on the left, despite having a Rwandan background. Burundi and Rwanda are two countries that are in Central Africa that are very close to each other. And yeah, okay, next one. So I'm part of the African diaspora, meaning that the African diaspora is a community of a worldwide collection of people that are descendants from people of the sub-Saharan Africa. I lived in Belgium until I was 6 years old. And when my whole family moved to New Jersey, and I've lived there ever since. Being the youngest of three siblings, I'm younger than my brother by 9 years and my sister by 14 years. I adopted an observational role within my family. Once I had turned 8 years old, both of my siblings had left for college, and throughout my childhood, art and design lived deep within my imagination. My mother being an artist served as a catalyst for my artistic endeavors. When I observed my mother painting, it fascinated me. This fascination brought this art into my hands, and I began to paint with her. This helped an essential aspect of myself to emerge. After my siblings left, my mother began taking frequent trips to Rwanda to visit her family. Not seeing my mother for months at a time had become a frequent stigma upon my early life. The hope for a genuine relationship with my mother had begun to erode in a slow, torturous way. At 13, I had not seen my mother in a year. This once unbreakable bond had faded. I resided within my own thoughts. I began to feel a deeper isolation from external society, prompting overwhelming feelings of dissociation to myself and others, causing me to feel like I had no choice but to remove myself completely from others. I developed a need to counteract these feelings by constantly comforting myself, oblivious to the fact that I had other options. Everything has a purpose. Choosing to abandon the outside world gave me more time to dedicate to understanding myself in a third perspective. Sometimes I felt like I had lost control of myself, leading me to believe I had thoughts that weren't always my own. This dissociation removed my identity, thus removing myself from others even more to the point of isolation. Often pondering the outside world and if anything was even real as a child, thinking the world could be some type of game and everyone was a part of, and I felt as though I was the only one who could see it as so. All these theories running through my mind, and I soon accepted that I would never gain a peace of mind, as if my mind was running a never-ending marathon. Have I lost this much touch with the outside world? Have I thought too far to the point where I had forgotten basic human behavior? As painful as it was, my isolation brought clarity. My art, turning into a survival mechanism, became my one true reminder of how I kept alive the bond with my mom as a child. Art represented the possibility and hope for connection with the outside world. Art proved to me that despite this isolation, there was always a way out. Nonetheless, my isolation prompted a sense of desperation, a desperation for validation and understanding. With no outside stimuli, I began to dig into myself. My mind had morphed into a tangible world. I developed a mental realm where I developed my own entities with whom I would communicate. It first started as a one-sided monologue. I found myself talking to myself a lot and describing my whole day to myself. I began to wonder, who am I really talking to? Is there someone? Because when I imagined myself talking to myself, there was no appeal to it. And then I began to realize that these were they were reflections of myself with whom I was communicating with. So eventually, this monologue turned into a dialogue. These entities allowed for a seamless understanding that I so desperately yearned, and I had strayed from reality, but they were the only ones who could really understand me for it. My entities opened up a floodgate, exposing me to extreme feelings that I would not be able to experience through the normal world. I lived in wonder of my own internal worlds, exploring my thoughts for hours on end. My mind fascinated me. Some entities struck fear into me, while others guided me. At first, it was overwhelming. However, understanding that these experiences were out of my control, I had only two choices: being paralyzed by fear of losing my sanity and witnessing my spiraling unfold, or diving into the deep end and moving with the current, allowing my mind to explore its extremities, with blind faith that there would be a greater purpose associated with this commitment. I chose the latter. Never quite sure if they were an extension of myself or independent beings, I began to realize that these entities manifested from different perspectives that I had. At first, they felt overwhelming, and their presence often threatened the borders separating my inner and exterior reality. It felt like I was removed from myself while being stuck inside myself all the same. Disorientating and a refuge at the same time, I began searching for a feeling that I knew was my identity, that I had believed that I once lost. I knew that it would come, but it hadn't come yet. I yearned for this seamless understanding between myself and others, and while I waited for a connection, I began to communicate with these entities in hopes of finding more clues of who I was. This is when my art began to express itself in so many forms and remove the barriers between my interior and exterior life, breaking down the lines of confinement that constrict our identity. My art took form in sketches, fabric, fashion design, 3D projects, but the most monumental experience that I've had was Yahwah. Yahwah is the gender-neutral children clothing line that I've started with my sister, who's 14 years older than me. We started this together. The discussion started many years ago when we were just thinking about this, and when I first opened up, my sister was the first person to whom I opened up my art to. I kept it a secret from the rest of my family except my sister, and then this sparked the idea of this clothing line. And then in 2016 of October last year, we launched we had our first launch. It was a soft launch, but it was still a launch. So these are two of the designs from our editorial photo shoot. Back to the entities. Comfortable now with these entities, I started writing a journal, and I wanted to understand more about myself and how they have shifted how I thought. So I named one of them. Her name was Cara. Cara could see me, and she always told me that she could hear me and see me in her world, but I couldn't. She intimidated me, but she still guided me. It felt as though I was falling, but she was the safety net that was able to catch me. Speaking to Cara was the me within. It was pristine, unaffected by self-imposed conformities. Speaking to Cara also sparked an idea that I started to believe that everyone has two separate identities, one within and then one that's presented to the outside, that takes on the role of whoever you're talking to. For example, if you're talking to your parents, you're the child, you take on that role, but then there's still the you within that's pristine and unaffected by others. So Cara taught me to be more in tune with this. My art also helped me get out of this hole because it represented, as I said earlier, it represented the bond with my mother. And then as I opened up to people about my art, it allowed me to feel heard and cancel out these feelings of isolation that I had once felt. This artistic journey brought me to realize that my isolation and the things I've gone through, they don't define me in the way I thought they once defined me. I once thought that they would constrict me and put me into a box almost. But I realized that these experiences are what will help me get out of these boxes. These entities are the people that can uplift me. Thank you.